Good evening, everybody. At this time, we will open the regular Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Wednesday, January 20th, 2021. Mr. Chin, if you would please, you know what, we're going to do the pre-application. No, you know what, we're going to hold the flag. I'm just looking at that. The pre-application is actually before the real meeting. So we're going to do the pre-application and then we'll start the meeting with the pledge. You were right on with my cue, but I just held back a little bit. Okay, so pre-application, 49 Daniels Farm Road. Go right ahead, whoever's here to participate for that.
Chairman, members of the commission, Raymond Rizzio for the record. Happy to be before you tonight, representing Megan Riccio with regard to the property at 49 Daniels Farm Road. We'd like to come before you with an adaptive reuse project. This is the old Daniel Hawley house. It's kind of at the corner, at the bottom of Daniels Farm Road, at the corner of Old Mill. There's currently 3 buildings. There's a single family, a non-conforming 3-family home. So the single families along Old Mill, the main house, which is a non-conforming 3 families on the top of the hill, and then there's an old barn there also. Dates back into the 1750s. Our client specializes in refurbishing and redoing historic homes. We would like to convert the project to a multi-unit project and while at the same time preserving all the structures. So currently the 3-family home is a very large 3-family. It really needs updating. The house needs a complete renovation, and our client would really like to turn that into. And Chris Russo is on with me. Chris, maybe you can just bring a couple pictures up to show the commission. You probably have driven by this 100 times and have seen it, wondering what's up on that hill. And this is this large multifamily up on the hill. They'd like to convert the large, this is at the bottom of Old Mill and Daniels Farm Road. There's the home. You've driven by it a bunch. It's a concoction of just room after room after add-on after add-on. It's got to be 6,000 square feet. What our client would like to do is convert that, keep the structure, totally renovate it, and make it into 9 studio or 1-bedroom apartments, which he thinks is really lacking in town. Then he would like to take the barn. If you go, Chris, if you can pull up the barn, completely redo the barn and turn that into 2 units. And then redo the single family, which sits along Old Mill. We've met with planning, we've met with economic development. We think there's a lot of good characteristics in here. We can tie our sidewalks from our property into the current sidewalks that run. Right now, there's no sidewalks there along that corner, and we could run sidewalks that would basically take you from there all the way to where the bridge is at the real bottom of Daniels Farm Road over the river. Lead you to walking trails. It'd be a great amenity to have these type of units where you can walk to Trumbull Center, you could walk to Starbucks, you could walk to numerous restaurants, walk to the parks, something really Trumbull doesn't have. All in keeping this old original house built in the 1750s. The other barn was built, I believe, in 1830. What we need to do is come before you for an adaptive reuse application. Currently, as you know, based last month, you guys enacted a moratorium on apartments in town. We have also, so that we can come before you with an adaptive reuse application, we actually have a text amendment that says, notwithstanding the foregoing, the moratorium shall not apply to any multifamily residential rental housing which is proposed under Article 2, Section 6 of the adaptive reuse of the Town of Trumbull regulations, which would basically just allow people to come before you with applications that are interesting to preserve old structures in town. Many of these are non-conforming. Many of these need a lot of money put into it, but they don't make financial sense. This property, for example, is almost 1.7 acres, which makes it vulnerable to all sorts of development. Our client would like to have the opportunity to come before you with a plan that would turn these into very attractive, basically preserve the homes.
Can everybody hear me? Is it
Mike,
just Ray that's going in and out, or is it Mike?
Am I okay or no?
It may be my computer.
Okay. So that's really what we'd like to do, come before you. Chris, maybe you can give a couple, let's take a look at the overhead view of the site. So you all know this piece, a large piece at the bottom of Daniels Farm Road. Doesn't really, we think it would be great to be able to preserve these homes. We could make, we would certainly mark it as the Daniel Hawley House. As you can see, you have access right down to Old Mill. The single families where you see where it says Old Mill, that's the single family that's right up on the street. We would completely redo that. And there's plenty of areas for parking on top to support the units. Would also allow us, like I said, just tremendous. We think it'd do very well in town with regard to where it's located, directly across from Trumbull Center, right on Old Mill Road, access to the to the to the whole nature walk along the Pequannock. And that's really what we'd like that opportunity before you. Chris, maybe you can give us a couple pictures showing what our some conceptual design would be. As you can see, we'd make this a little community up there. We have room for 24 parking spaces. Give us a couple pictures if you can.
Under what regulation do you intend to propose these as being allowed?
Adaptive reuse. It fits, we've sat with staff. This fits squarely into your adaptive reuse regulation, but for the fact that you have this apartment moratorium. The beauty of the adaptive reuse regulation also is where you have your greatest amount of discretion. If you don't like it, you know, the standards are very, very broad for you to make a judgment if this is worthy of an adaptive reuse. As you can see, this barn, which was built, I believe, in the 1800s, would be converted to 2 nice units. Really would look nice. Chris, if you can show us the single family. This is the single family. We would, like I said, be able to convert this. This sits right on Old Mill Road. We put a little kind of statue there, or we'll put some kind of monument there to mark this for Daniel Hawley. And I think we could end up with just a very, very nice structure that would go along with a colonial village type look with tremendous access and great use of a 1.7 acre parcel versus the multiple non-conforming buildings that sit on the site.
Have you done any legwork with your neighbors on either side of the street?
Not yet. We thought we'd come before the commission and see how receptive they are before we had that discussion.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the room and see what everybody has to say. In this particular case, I'll just a quick overview from staff if you wanted, and then we're going to go to each commissioner and see what questions they have. If there's anything, if you don't have anything to add, Rob, that's fine, but I just want
I just want to add, the applicant, the potential property owner is on the Zoom call, Dan Riccio. And one of the things that he stated to me during one of our meetings is that he would be living in the single family house. So not only would he be renting out these apartments, but he would be living on site with his family as well too. And there was discussion with providing connections with Nero Hawley, the monument there as well too, signage, connection. There's a huge gap of sideway that's not connected there that they're willing to do. I think the real discussion is this a feasible use and the number of units of what the commission feels comfortable with.
Okay.
We are doing a study with the downtown hopefully soon. So this definitely ties into one of those needs, potential needs for that location. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Silber, do you have any questions for the pre-applicant?
Well, I don't know if I have questions, but it's a concern. It's one of the most historic houses in Trumbull, and it represents, you know, very fundamentally a Trumbull legacy. Not only the Hawley family, but Nero Hawley himself, who's one of the most famous historical residents in this town. It's also directly abutting a historic cemetery, which already has really limited access down that, what is that, Old Mill Road. And then the third, just off the top, the third observation I have is we have a sort of a standalone condominium style village going in this virtually next door. At some point that's going to get built, maybe this year. So, you know, we end up, you know, we'd be looking at a lower Daniels Farm Road from that point all the way down to the intersection with White Plains Road of a multifamily housing sort of, you know, hodgepodge zone. So those are my concerns off the top.
Okay. Mr. Curry? We have to unmute you. You have to unmute yourself.
I think we need a major lesson on adaptive reuse because I've never heard of that being used as apartments before. So I'm totally confused, absolutely confused. Adaptive reuse, I thought it was, I don't know, I gotta go read that because I've never heard that you could use adaptive reuse to put apartments in a neighborhood. I've never heard that before.
Yeah,
Totally
well,
new to me.
We've
I've been on
taken,
the commission for a
Hold
long
on.
time.
hold on. Because one of the things that, it's the reason I asked the question, Mr. Curry, it's a good question. To me, adaptive reuse was, or is, you took something that exists and you want to reuse it for something else, but the thing you're going to reuse it for also has to exist as some type of regulation or function that you are now going to apply to this property in reusing it, adaptive reusing it. I just want to make sure that we are not, as you're pointing out, which is the reason I asked the question, we don't want to say adaptive reuse. This may require Mr. Lebrandi and Mr. Cordone's interpretation. I don't think we're going to answer it on this call. I know Mr.
Yeah.
Rizzio is
I've never
dying,
heard of it before. Just,
but I
it
don't
kind of blew
know.
my mind.
Right. I don't know that it is or is not in this 30 seconds acceptable to say we're going to use the phrase adaptive reuse to create miniature high density housing. That's why
Right,
I
the other
asked
thing
what
is-
particular zone we were going to apply here, or how are we going to make this happen? Like if somebody said, we're going to take Madison Village regulation and apply it here, that's the adaptive reuse we're doing, that would be the plugin. But I need legal advice from the town and our town planner to exactly what you're saying. How do we think adaptive reuse allows for the provision of this project? I got it. So
Right, can
I want to keep
interject
going.
also? Yeah, let me just interject one thing that I forgot, and that's there's an intensity of use provision in the adaptive use regulation, which you effectively cannot increase the intensity of use. So I think if I read it correctly, that by itself disqualifies this use.
I think you can't increase the square footage. That's different. We don't have any intention of increasing the square footage. Your regulation basically says it's got to be existing non-conforming use, which in this instance would be a three-family or three structures on a home, must be residential, office, retail, or a combination of such uses. So that's where we thought that we qualified. And we're not intending to increase the square footage any greater than what is presently existing.
Right.
So
So
Attorney
the
Rizzio,
thing-
is that the regulation says where a new non-conforming use is proposed to replace a pre-existing non-conforming use, the proposed new use shall be similar in intensity to the existing non-conforming use.
Right. So the thing that I want to make sure for all of us, because I don't think anybody's saying great project or really bad project right now. I think now what we're talking about is a little bit of the nuts and bolts. If this thing is proceeding forward, what is the sure footing for this to proceed forward? So in the adaptive reuse, I don't see an automatic plug-in to what the high density housing application could be blessed with, other than we're just changing it because of adaptive.
Well, for example, Chairman,
Active
and
reuse.
I
So
don't need to.
let's not dwell on this. We can get staff at the end.
Yeah, I mean, for example, what Mr. Silver was saying, if you have multiple houses, can I be heard? It looks like we're frozen, some of us. But if you had, for example, in this instance where you had a three-family home, which is non-conforming,
Right.
and each of the families have 3-bedroom units, and instead we're now going to do 9 one-bedroom units. That would not technically, in my mind, increase the intensity of the
So
use.
here's what I think is best course forward here. I want to get you not try to continue to sell your intent. Okay. What we need to do is to legally define the intent, and does it match our process? And it might be you need some new language along with what you're proposing, right?
Yep.
So we may or may not. So I really don't want to hear any more about let's try and convince that this is the way to go until we get the investigation from staff and our legal. Okay. So
Sure.
I'm going to, Mr. D'Aquila, your turn.
I think that when I'm reading under Article 17, the moratorium on the multifamily housing, that this applies. I don't see how it doesn't apply.
No, that's what Mr. D'Aquila, we also proposed a text amendment that would exempt
Right.
an application under an adaptive reuse
Right.
residential as an exception to your moratorium.
Right. If you recall,
it was
Mr.
a- it was a-
D'Aquila, when we passed the moratorium, this subject had come up because they knew they were coming, and staff and attorneys had advised we were not going to carve anything out on the townwide moratorium. If any applications came forward, they would have to individually apply for a carve out. That's what they would have to do. So you are correct in pointing that out. Anything else other than what we've all already brought up, Mr. D'Aquila?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Prush.
Yeah. First of all, I think almost anything can be done under adaptive reuse, because the purpose of adaptive reuse is to find a new creative use for old buildings or for old houses, or in order to keep them. And I don't know that I have a lot of questions. I probably have one question. But what I have are some photos here. I see a red building. That's the single family, I take it.
Red building is
The yellow building is the barn.
Yellow's a 3-family.
Well, I see
Red-
the yellow, the big house, the 3-family. I
Right,
see a barn that's painted yellow,
right. That is a
and I
barn.
see a red
That's a
house.
on
I was
Old
trying to figure out, but not that it really matters. But the thing we have, because we're talking about modern day regulations and slapping them onto a historic property and saying, oh, you can't do it, possibly because what our regulations are. And we have to look at this a little deeper. This is a historic property. And not only, and there are 3 ways you look at historic properties, especially of this kind, when you are thinking about what to do with them. Is it culturally significant? Is it historically significant, meaning did somebody important live there? Is it representative of a time? And is it architecturally significant? It could maybe be not architecturally significant, but somebody important like a Nero Hawley, let's say, has some connection to the property, just as an example. And so you have, and of course, it's going to be all jumbled about here. I think one thing it has going for it is that it's right across the street from the town, Trumbull Center. So it's not out in the middle of a residential area. It does have a connection to the process of going into the valley. There's some things that can be applied to this intangibles. So I think it's worth looking at it in that respect, because if we cannot find a way to reuse these properties, the property is probably obsolete now. Tell me if I'm wrong, as a single family house, single family property. And if we cannot find a use for it, I guarantee you these are going to disappear because they have no protections whatsoever.
Correct. That's a
So
very good point.
it's worthwhile looking at trying, is there a way to do something that will preserve this property? So I think, you know, what they're doing, it raises a good question here, because it's a special situation. But I think it's important that if someone's going to come before us with a new proposal, that it retains the characteristics of the old buildings. I'm looking at some drawings here of the three family. It looks like it could be in any new residential development in town. And while we're not an architectural board or a review board, if the purpose is adaptive reuse or creative reuse to retain historic structures, they need to continue to look like historic structures, retaining the characteristics or the defining characteristics of what they have. Granted that they need to have viability to have certain changes made perhaps in order to make them all single family residences. The question of whether it's 9 apartments or whatever, that's another question. That's another situation. And I think the fact that it's across from Town Hall Center certainly weighs into that. But I do want to add that, yeah, we worked for a year on that property next door. I don't think this is a hodgepodge of this area. It is a hodgepodge right now. And what we're doing is trying to put some order onto it, in whether it's a historic way. I think we even brought up the historic cemetery and protecting it when we were looking at the development, on the, up the Daniels Farm Road a little ways. That was one of our big concerns, and the protection of the property and the adjacent properties. And the same thing goes for this. So all I'm saying is I think it's worthwhile looking at, needs some work. But there are a number of questions that I think should be brought into this, because frankly, many adaptive reuse projects are apartments. I mean, Bridgeport's full of them. In old, the factory buildings, old schools are used, many times. That's what adaptive reuse is. It is to find new use.
Great. Thank you for that, Dave. That was pretty good. So, if I can be bold and do a very quick synopsis here, Mr. Prush highlighted some of the positives that Mr. Silber brought up from the same coin, maybe a different perspective, that because it is historic, we actually have no protections if somebody wanted to bulldoze it all down. We have somebody who's coming in who would like to preserve the historic value there in whatever shape or fashion can be done to semi-modernize and make it efficient and attractive to modern day. And the reason I asked the question, the same one that Mr. Corey did and Mr. DeQuilla has, does the adaptive reuse match? And are we going to be able to consider this as a carve out as would be necessary? So I think with all that being said, I think a stronger evaluation of how many units versus the parking, versus what is there. So I think this is semi-supportive speech here, but we would like to see you work with staff a little more on the adaptive reuse language, because each of the commissioners understands their own interpretation of adaptive reuse. And we just
Mr.
want to make sure,
Chairman,
because
I have a question. Is this to say that if someone has a historic home, they could just put a bunch of apartments in it? Is that what this adaptive reuse is saying? Just like that? Is that what we're saying?
no, the adaptive reuse language, and Mr. Cordone can maybe chime in here a little bit, or Mr. Lebrandi. Adaptive reuse standalone says that they are taking something that is either conforming or non-conforming and changing the use of it to make it more useful right?
This regulation does allow for housing, but as Attorney Rizzio said, this commission has very strong discretion of what they consider adaptive reuse. So this is one of the most, the toughest regulations to actually get through because you have a lot of hearsay on design, use, a lot of requirements. There was only one other adaptive reuse that was done in town in the Nichols area. And there was a condition of approval that was so stringent on the developer
yeah,
that they
you know,
kind of stepped away from it. So,
it
you
was-
know, but they have to follow it. So, you know, I think there's a lot of protective measures in the adaptive reuse. I think they just have to be something comfortable that the commission could move
But-
forward with.
Yeah, because, you know, I envisioned adaptive reuse was something sort of on a main road that was gonna be, it was gonna retain a character and it was gonna be maybe a low intensity office space like the one on Nichols or the
Yeah,
building
maybe
that was,
that's professional
put
office
into-
overlay zone.
protect
That's
the
also
building
been
that was on Broadway that got torn down. And now you're saying all of a sudden it's turned into a way to put
I
high
don't think-
density apartments in a neighborhood?
Mr. Curry, I don't think from what I heard, it's all of a sudden. I think that the opportunity to use and exercise it hasn't been done. As Mr. Prush pointed out, being an architect and being in the business, that adaptive reuse is used for apartments all over. And it's one of the common things. It just
one of-
hasn't been done in Trumbull. There hasn't been opportunity for somebody to
One of
come
the
in.
biggest problems we've had is when you see 12 cars in a house and you're trying to prove that it's not a bunch of college kids living there because it's changing the neighborhood. And this is sort of saying that's okay to do.
It is. It's absolutely saying
it's
that
never been-
their application is saying we'd like to have 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, or 14 units here, whatever it is.
And you,
Yes,
and you-
that's
but
what they're
this means
asking.
that anywhere in town, this rare instance where you have 8 cars, or you're trying to figure out if it's all a bunch of college kids living there, and you can't figure it out, and you go to the zoning enforcement officer, and he tells you can't do anything about it. We're saying, yeah, the P and Z saying, yeah, do that.
Well,
Well,
no,
you're-
Mr. Corey, can I just say?
hold on, Mr. Rizzo. Mr.
Sure.
Curry, I think you bring up very good points, right? And one of the things that you have to do, and all of us as a commissioner with staff, is say, are those issues going to be created if in fact this application proceeds? Well, they've presented something that shows all the parking is in the rear. They've showed something where they're trying to preserve the historicness of this property, but we all have questions over the feasibility of it. Mr. Prush brought up some of the architectural support issues. You know, Mr. D'Aquila brought up the fact that it's not technically allowed now. They'd have to carve out and we'd have to approve the carve out. So the questions you bring up do exist, but they have to be palatably answered by the applicant for all of us to say, this particular application on this particular property does or does not make sense.
Yeah, so can I just add one thing, Chairman, then I'll get out of the way, just make Mr. Corey or Commissioner is, for example, this house like here is 7,500 square feet. It's a 3-family. It probably has 10 bedrooms. When you start talking about intensity of use, if you made them 9 1-bedrooms, you got a much less, you'll tend to have single people, older people, people living alone versus, groups of college kids living in a 10-room house, treating it like a fraternity house versus individual occupancy, which is more limited and more controllable. So you'll have to make that decision, which one you'd like. But that's one of the reasons with these old 7,000 square foot homes, they don't make sense as single family homes anymore. The cost.
This looks like a house that was added on to many, many times. It doesn't look like a historical home to me. That's just my opinion.
I'm telling, but it was, the main house was built in like the 1700s. And typically what used to
I can't
happen,
even tell what the main house looked like from this picture. It doesn't
used
look
to-
like some historical home to me. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not trying to be
Right.
argumentative. It just looks like this was a house that
Right.
got added on to a lot of times and,
All right, so
And it's
we're
big.
past our half-hour time limit here for the pre-application. I think we have some questions here that we'd like to have staff work with the applicant on, and whether it's another pre-app or it goes forward, we can take another pulse. This is clearly an application to modernize and adaptive reuse and bring some modernization to Trumbull Center on some historic properties while trying to preserve as best they can the historic properties while providing more living options for folks in the Trumbull Center area that is growing and modernizing as we speak. And we have to say, does this work for us? And then, like the questions that we all asked, do the specific nuts and bolts of the process the applicant is trying to proceed on work and apply, and are we within our bounds to continue forward if we see fit? All right. So with
Chairman
that,
Garrity, I want to make one point too, and I just want to differ with the idea that historic homes in Trumbull are vulnerable. They should not be. I mean, especially this one. I
right, it's
wanna
a
make that
different
point. It's important.
question.
I mean,
Yeah.
we can plow over our history, if that's what we want to be, and we'll end up being a 60s and 70s subdivision town exclusively. And so I'm not in favor of an argument that says we have to do this because we're going to lose our historic homes. How about
No,
getting
we don't have to do that, but you also have to remember what you just said. There are no protections in place. There is nothing that exists to enforce to stop the demolition and rebuilding of any property in the
we have a
town.
demolition delay ordinance and committee?
Right, but that's for safety. It's not for historic, unless it's going to be declared historic by the state, it's a process that doesn't exist in
I'm
Trumbull.
just making an abstract point there about
Yep.
preservation of historical homes.
Okay, so we're going to move on with the regular meeting now at this point, if everybody's ready. Okay, so at this time, we'll go forward with the public hearing for the regular meeting. Mr. Chin, if you're ready now, we will start the meeting. If everybody would join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the
To
republic
the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all.
Okay, so we'll do roll call now. Mr. Corey, he's here. Mr. D'Aquila, you are here. Mr. Silber, you are
Present.
here. Mr. Prush, you are here. I am here. Commissioner LeConte is absent, and Commissioner Cinto is absent, and we still can send our best wishes to both of them in their recuperations. Okay, so for anybody from the public who is listening in, we have a special permit application for 1056 Daniels Farm Road and an application for 40 Tudor Lane. Excuse me. Just so everybody knows, the Tudor Lane has been withdrawn. It's not continued, right? It's withdrawn.
It's continued.
It's continued. All right. So we'll do that when we, we can do that now out of order so that it's done. So if anybody is on the line waiting to hear about the Tudor Lane application, that won't be happening. So I'm going to go out of order for a second, and I'll take a motion to continue 42 Tudor Lane. File
Mr. Chairman,
2017.
I'd ask that we continue it to our next regularly scheduled meeting, February 17th, please.
Next regularly scheduled meeting. Is there that motion made? Somebody? Mr. Corey, seconded. Mr. Silber, all in favor? Aye. Okay, at this time, Attorney Cordone, would you like to go over the internet implications for our meeting according to the state?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As usual, our meetings are being conducted per executive orders of the governor, which allow us to conduct the meetings by video conference and over telephone and internet. The public may comment during the public comment section of the meeting by raising their hand electronically or by hitting *9 on the phone. If you're on the phone, those instructions will be provided at that time. Please note that any comments posted on Facebook Live or any other format are not included in the record and will not be shown to the commissioners. The agenda and all supporting items, is my understanding, were posted on the town website 24 hours in advance of this meeting. And I would advise everyone that tonight's meeting is being recorded. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we will hear the continuation of, excuse me, 1056 Daniels Farm Road. The applicant is the Bridgeport Roman Catholic Diocese Corporation requesting a special permit modification of zoning approval to remove a condition of approval to allow upright monuments pursuant to Article 2, Section 1243, Article 15 of the Town of Trumbull zoning regulations, and this is continued from the December 16 meeting, file 20-15. So at the last meeting, we left off with all the commissioners taking a pulse and giving opinion that they would like the applicant to come back with an outline showing where the limitations of any changes, if approved, would occur, and any mitigating circumstances to provide for those changes that you would put in place. So at this time, I'm going to start with staff as a quick overview, and then we're going to give it to the applicant. So Rob, just like last time, you want to give a quick update if there is one?
Yeah, I think yesterday, the day before, a revised plan was sent out to the commissioners, showing the locations of, there were some questions about where these potential monuments would go on site. So there was a plan that was submitted. We did discuss I think Attorney D'Aquila, Commissioner D'Aquila stated about having a representative here as well to talk about that. Other than that, we're just waiting for a response from the applicant.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman, I have a question with regard to Rob. I didn't receive anything. I didn't receive any new material.
Digitally,
I didn't receive it. When did you send it? Today?
no. Linda, wasn't this sent out?
I sent it out this morning.
Well, I haven't checked my email. I don't think I'm prepared to go forward with this until I have an opportunity, an adequate opportunity to review all this new information. I cannot make an informed decision without access and an ability to adequately review the information.
Yeah, I think we received this on Monday afternoon.
it was a holiday.
Yeah, so maybe it was Tuesday then.
Okay, so we're gonna, everybody seems, is anybody else not prepared? Everybody, because what I would say is we'll let the applicant present and they can share their screen and we'll see who has questions for, what they're presenting on what we asked for. I understand your reservations, Mr. D'Aquila, and we will take any questions you have as we go along. So, Mr. Rizzio, would you like to begin your presentation, please?
Sure, Chair, members of the commission, once again, Raymond Rizzio, for the record, representing the Bridgeport Roman Catholic Diocese. I'll ask Dave Bjorkins with me today and Chris Russo, and if one of them can just pull up our, the new plan, it's the plan that shows the limitations which we were requested to consider. So we have looked at a couple pages. We took into consideration a lot of the comments from the commission, which I thought were excellent. Mr. Corey had talked about keeping that prairie-like view when you come in. They had talked about providing screening to make sure that neighbors don't have to see these headstones. And they talked about basically not ending with a mismatch so that we'd have designated areas for the uprights. So basically what you see before you, there's a 1.77 acre piece and a 1.87 acre piece. One to the 1.7 north of the driveway, the 1.87 south of the driveway. That currently, as you know, if you've been into Gates of Heaven, as you come in, there's a little drive-through area with which it's like a little semicircle there that you can pull off. What we decided to do, and we looked at all the cemeteries in town, most of the cemeteries that are up near the road. We looked at the, Long Hill Burial Ground, the one on Middlebrooks Avenue, all the different cemeteries have a similar situation, except the difference is most of them sit up by the road. The 1.7 acre section, what we decided to do will sit basically behind the bishop's residence. It sits, as you can see, we're at about 505 feet on Daniels Farm Road. this is sitting at the top, at least 10 feet. 495 is where the highest part is, going all the way down to 479 on a sloping basis. What we'd like to do is put a buffer planting area, as you can see, between the bishop's residence and this 1.7 acre, 7 acre piece. And then so that it maintains the character of all the other cemeteries in town and along the driveway, so you're not looking at it, we would agree to put a white 4-foot high picket fence. We picked 4 feet high because we also mentioned at our last hearing that we would agree to a condition of approval that limited the uprights to no higher than 4 feet. Most uprights, if you know, need I've learned this, I've become an expert. I was represent the Hartford Diocese and now the Bridgeport Diocese with regard to cemeteries. Almost all uprights have a 12-inch base with which the headstone sits on, and then up to a 36-inch headstone. So we're not looking to put little mausoleums around here. It would straightly be uprights, no more than a 12-inch base, no more than a 36-inch headstone. Now, so at some points, when it gets closer to the driveway, will be almost 30 feet below the grade of Daniels Farm Road. I'll show you some pictures later, and you notice that because the mausoleum, which is directly north of it, is about 30 feet high, and you can barely see the roof from Daniels Farm Road. So we picked these two areas so that it will not disturb the look as you come in off Daniels Farm Road. So basically what you'll do, you'll come in Daniels Farm Road, you'll have a 4-foot high, nice picket fence that will line the driveway in. The headstones, which will be no higher than the fence, will be behind it. And then as Mr. Corey stated, you like to see that open look. You'll have the open look as you come down the hill. And then once you get to the end of the drive and the white picket fence, everything there will remain with nothing more than flat markers to maintain that prairie-like look. We also, now there's one other area to the south. There's,
Mr. Rizzio,
yes,
so as a condition, if this application was to be approved,
yes,
there should be probably a condition at the end that the same way you have connotated where the areas where a prospective change you're asking for would go, there should be a delineation of the existing areas that would require verbiage to protect that you could not in the future change and mix the flat stones and the new above ground.
100%. Chairman, we would agree as a condition of approval to limit the headstones to these areas being only for headstones. And be specifically, this would be in effect the new master plan. You got an old master plan just had these laid out for anything.
Yeah.
So we would agree to that as a condition of approval, that these two highlighted areas would be the only places that headstones could go. That they
Yeah, I
would need,
believe it was Mr. DeQuilla last time who said it was a common sense thing that we didn't want to mix areas, and that makes perfect sense.
we have no problem with that. That was our intention. So in effect, with regard to viewing of this area, the area south of the driveway, there's one home at the end of Wildfire. We agree to put a buffered planting area. This will have, I believe, a mix of 8 feet arborvitae and spruce. We can work with staff to do that. That will provide even a stronger buffer than currently exists, that is really well wooded, so that the person at the end of Wildfire would not be able to see any of the headstones through the there would not be deciduous plantings. They would be evergreens that would be planted there so that they would never have to see the headstones. So basically what you do is you'd have a nice entryway, you'd have the headstone shielded by a white picket fence, and then you'd go into the same gates of heaven that you all know, because keep in mind, neither of these areas are planted. With regard to the headstones, I mean, we currently have, and this commission's been great to, you have a mausoleum that's been approved there. The mausoleum basically currently has 550 crypts and about 600 niches. The part that's being added now will be another 696 crypts, another 440 niches. So between just in the mausoleum alone, which may be the biggest headstone, probably the biggest headstone in town, you have about you have over 2,000 accommodation to be able to accommodate 2,000 people. Joe McCurdy is with us tonight, and I'll go through, I went through a lot of your questions with him, so I'll go through them for you. And if you have any additional questions, you can ask Joe. That there's currently about 25,000 people buried in Gates of Heaven. It's been open for a long time, and we do about 300 burials a year. At least once or twice a week, which at minimum, there's even more this year because of COVID, but you have at least once to twice a week, they lose people because they don't have uprights. Almost everybody that comes in inquires about headstones. Some don't leave because a family member's there. It's the only Catholic burial ground in town. And, they end up accepting, the flat marker. But overwhelmingly, we see demand for the headstones. Every other, I guess there's there's probably 6 or 7 cemeteries in town. Every other cemetery has headstones. No other cemetery probably has the buffering that this cemetery has. And we think because of the size of the cemetery, we have the ability to offer the best of both worlds. Basically a prairie-like looking flat, with flat markers area, and then also headstones that are well protected upon a colonial-like picket fence, consistent with the town, but also buffered so that people driving down Daniels Farm Road, or the only house on Wildfire will never have to look at a headstone. I mean, everybody knows it's a cemetery there. It's not like people don't know what Gates of Heaven is. It might have been a concern when back in the 50s, when this cemetery was established, that, as Daniels Farm was getting developed, they didn't want to see headstones out on Daniels Farm Road. So they agreed to flat markers. But, cemeteries, as I think Commissioner Silbert talked about, you go to Oaklawn Cemetery is maybe one of the prettiest pieces of property in the entire city of Bridgeport. Done right, done tastefully, with the right conditions and of approval, the cemetery can be fine. I mean, it's funny, I took my grandkids to the Greenfield Hill Cemetery this summer, and there's men that volunteer 2 mornings a week to refinish the headstones and set them up, because people like to see that historic character in the center of Greenfield Hill around the most expensive homes. We don't believe this will have any negative effect on any values. We believe it's well buffered and sheltered. We believe it is there is demand for it in town. And Chris, if you can go to the pictures from Daniels Farm Road so they can make the commission comfortable that I don't think you're going to have to worry about driving by looking at a bunch of headstones. We took some pictures. So that is looking up from Daniels Farm Road. The wall is about where the area starts, where the headstones would start. There'd be a buffering of evergreens in front of it and a white picket fence, and then it sits even further down. Chris, if you can give a view from Daniels Farm Road looking down. So if you can see that barely see the roof of that, that's the mausoleum, which is 30 feet high. Then you have over to the left is the maintenance barn, which is similar height, but the land, it's pulled up a little further. So you are not going to see a 4-foot headstone behind evergreens, behind a white picket fence. So we think it's going to be a beautiful entrance. It's going to be a place where people will be able to worship their loved ones and have the type of burials that are very much in demand. Chris, let me take a couple more pictures as you come down the entranceway. We can look at a couple of the photos just to make, I'm sure you've all walked by it, like there's showing how densely wooded it is by the pond, which is the rear section of the 1.87 acre piece. Show the entranceway in.
Is it showing the entrance? I might be showing the
No, you're still showing Daniels Farm Road.
Oh, okay, hold on one second. Let me fix it.
Now, keep in mind, that one, with the picture you're looking at there, that's in front of that's to the left of the bishop's home. So, I mean, you'll have to look through the bishop's home basically to see the 1.77 acre piece. So this is the area we're talking about. And we're not talking about past the 20, you have to go past the 20-mile-per-hour sign before you'll even, and a good way down, probably the second 20-mile-per-hour sign before you have that little turnaround where the, first of all, there'll be a landscape buffer. And then secondly, it'll be a white picket fence leading you down into the cemetery. Where those big evergreens are, that's still where the bishop's home is. That's the one house on Wildfire that is most affected, that we don't believe will have any impact at all from our application. Once you put in and that's how thickly, that's from the turnaround, how densely and thickly mature shrubs there are there. And then as you can see, that's an area that we also will add evergreens so that you don't have to worry about looking through trees. So you can see the turnaround there in the left-hand side, up on the left-hand side, and then it goes all the way down to the pond. So what you'll see is some evergreens, and then along the drive, you'll see the white picket fence.
Okay, so Mr. Rizzio, I just want to clarify, you keep using the word monuments. These are headstones. We're not
Headstone.
providing for the allowance of monuments.
No,
Right.
as I said,
You-
a 12-inch
you're
base.
Changing the word monument to headstone.
Correct. Yeah, we're not, yes.
We don't
It'll
want to
be-
call them.
We can specifically call it no more than a 12-inch base and no higher than a 36-inch headstone on top of the base.
We're talking about two specified areas that would allow headstone markers no higher than 4 feet high
Correct.
that will be obscured from the road, and new plantings to obscure the one home that has visibility today.
Correct.
All right, I'm gonna go on the room. Mr. Prush,
I think he's muted.
unmute. You're still on mute, Mr. Prush.
Yep, got it. Yeah, I drove up here a couple of weeks ago just to drive around myself, and I could aside from all of the Christmas, the ferns and evergreens and things that were all over, it looked very, it is kind of an open area, and I would say that this is a good thing that was done here, because it really provides a big open space in the middle of what is now just an area covered with single family houses on 1 acre lots. And if this hadn't been done, this would be there too. So the fact that it's, as we say, a prairie look or a farm or a field look, it's because of what the diocese did here. And I think and for that reason alone, we want to take them seriously and see what we can do. To me, the main concern from what I see from letters and things like that is the views from outside the property, not so much from the inside of the property. And yes, I agree with Attorney Rizzio. You're not going to see this from Daniels Farm Road. I didn't think this was where they were going to put it. Actually, I thought it was going to go down in the back. And in my own research, I also realized that they own a 55-acre piece of property behind this that's undeveloped. And not that that's part of this or anything, but it's sort of something keep in the back of your mind what is going to happen to that. So for that reason, I think this is certainly, they've been a good neighbor up here, that we should listen to this and see if this is that important, if something can be done to help them. I know these aren't questions, but I think the one thing that I would question is that if we're trying to preserve a open field or an open farm field look, I really don't think we need the picket fence. I think the picket fence, you don't see picket fences in the middle of fields. You see picket fences at the street or surrounding a property. We're not trying to protect people going into the cemetery. The people going into the cemetery are the ones who want the stones. I'm more concerned with the neighbor, you know, outside the area and what it looks like from within. And I think they've, you know, by putting in a buffer of trees and certainly there right now are a lot of trees there. I don't really have any questions. I can't suggest a better place or, you know, why it's going there. It's either there or the other side, but I think perhaps trying to tuck it in here where they can put some shield, you know, actually the closer to Daniels Farm Road with the evergreen or the tree buffer is probably the best way to conceal perhaps. So like I said, I don't have a lot of questions, but just those are just a few comments
Okay.
that I have.
Thank you, Dave. That was good. And now that you mention it, the picket fence might be better if it wasn't there. Yeah, you know, and it does keep that open look. But I think you just pointed something out that was said before that it's worth mentioning. Standalone is that the protections that were put in, you know, 61 years ago now, is that they wanted to prevent the expansion all the way to the road, which the Catholic Church has not done. They've kept it deep and interior and non-visible from the road. So I think the protections are still in place. All right, Mr. D'Aquila, you have some comments for us?
Chairman, can I just add one thing before Mr.
No,
DePaul?
hold on.
Okay,
No,
sure.
just-
Sorry.
Mr. D'Aquila.
I think the Diocese of Bridgeport has made some reasonable compromises. However, I still would need more time to look at what has been presented to us, and I will not be able to vote on
What's
it.
your opinion on the white fence? What's
Who asked that question?
your opinion on the white fence? I asked the question. I hadn't really dwelled on it till Mr. Prush brought it up, and I'm kind of receptive to not having the white fence and keeping the open look when you're in there, because you won't see the fence or the stones from the road.
I tend to agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I really don't think the white fence is appropriate. I never saw a white fence in any cemetery. I've been to many, many cemeteries.
Okay, so we're gonna
However,
we're gonna keep going. I'm gonna go to if you have any more questions or comments
I still would like
at this
to
time.
hear from the public. And I
We are
also,
gonna
I still would like
we
to
are
have additional
once we
time
finish.
to review these drawings, just to make sure that there's no hidden factors here. So I'm
Yeah, I
looking
think
at a
staff
continu-
has reviewed the drawings. One of the things we are going to do tonight is once we finish the commissioner comments, we are going to go to the public. We're going to read the letters or the names on the letters that were submitted, and then we are going to go to the public. So I'll go on. If you can chime back in later if you think of something. Mr. Corey?
I'd like to thank the diocese for trying to accommodate some of our concerns. I agree with you that the white fence probably isn't going to help the natural beauty, but I think the attempt to try to, you know, some people have a stigmatism living next to stones, and they try to make an attempt to kind of not have that feeling when you drive by. So if maybe if there was a possibility of a berm along the front of it, something like that, just a natural berm, to kind of some sort of landscape, just to kind of have the same effect of assuring residents that, yeah, we're putting in stones, but we're going to berm it.
Where are you talking about, Mr. Corey? At Daniels Farm Road? At the edge
Well,
of
I'm just
Daniels
talking
Farm
about where
Road?
the fence would be, maybe maybe just a sort of a berm with some shrubbery, just to kind of keep it separate. So yeah, just to kind of to meet the intent
Right,
of
so
what they
let's
try to
take-
do with the fence.
let's
If
take
they
a,
maybe
let's
consider
take a deep
something like
breath
that, that'd
here
be
for
my
a
only-
second.
Huh?
Mr. Corey, let's take a deep breath here for a second, because if we remove or don't impose the white fence, if, Mr. Russo, if you could bring back up the drawing that shows the Bishop House and the two layouts, the drawing, I think what you're asking for already exists. They're adding shrubbery
Yeah, they try to,
and
what they try
berm
to do is
there
keep,
already. So maybe you could just ask,
well, I
right,
think what
so
they
as
try to
soon
do
as
is
he
to
brings
keep
it up,
what the fence was doing was keeping, you know,
right,
as you drove in,
so
to kind of just keep the natural.
can you see
effect
where he's
of the
pointing
original
with the
cemetery.
arrow? Right,
Huh?
can you see where he's
Yeah, that's,
pointing with the arrow? That's,
yeah.
I think that's exactly what you're asking for. They're doing that. They're adding a whole bunch of trees, evergreens, whatever you will, and staff. They're going to work with staff to lay that out there to accomplish exactly what you're asking for. That was part of the presentation,
all right.
right? Because we don't want it at Daniels Farm Road, because then it obscures the whole prairie-like view. You know, it takes away the whole field atmosphere. I think what you're asking for, they've done.
Yeah, the 7
Unless-
to 8 foot
I'm
trees.
gonna bring it back up in case you had a question.
Well, so now, see, what they try to do was, so the people who go to the old cemetery, they were trying to keep them feeling like they were in the old cemetery, and now they're gonna go buy stones, and they're gonna wonder why, you know, now it's gonna blend. There's gonna be no real differentiation between the new and the old, and the people on the other side of the line are
The
gonna feel.
roadway, there's a road there.
No, but,
They'll be separated by the road.
yeah,
They're going to be separate sections. They're three distinct sections divided by the roadway rather than a white fence.
okay. But I guess you could argue it either way, but I thought they were trying to keep, how are you gonna convince people who are in the other part of the cemetery that they can't put a stone up? They're gonna wonder why it's gonna all blend together now, I think.
Because they're going to be sections. There's a section for flat top and a section for headstones. It's just going to be the way it is. I understand what you're asking. The answer is because that's the way it's zoned. If it
Yeah,
passes.
but I mean, they were, well, I'm just saying that they are now gonna see a cemetery. They're gonna be in a cemetery and they're gonna see stones. Before they were kind of in their own, it was similar to, what they made an attempt to do is to make it like the old cemetery. Now they're gonna be in a cemetery, it's gonna be stones, and they can't have stones, so I think it's gonna, it could cause a lot of problems, I think. I mean, that's what I anticipate. People are not
That's-
gonna understand why all of a
That's not
sudden
a
on this
planning-
line,
That's not
they're
a
gonna say, it's
planning
all
and zoning
blending.
issue. That's
From a
is that
visual
more
standpoint,
customer
the
service?
stones where they are now.
No,
You
I
know,
understand what you're saying. I want to get to the bottom of, I think what you're describing is a customer service issue. When families show up and say,
Well,
we'd like one or we wouldn't, or
well,
how
no,
come they can have it and we
okay.
can't?
Well, let me just tell you, when we said, the recommendation I had was that, you know, when you were in the old part of the cemetery, it would kind of look the same. It's not gonna look the same now because it's gonna be stone. One, you look left, it's gonna be all stones, and the rest of it's gonna be just open. So it's not gonna look the same to them without some sort of buffer. That's all I'm saying. It's gonna
So
look,
what,
it's gonna look like a cemetery to them. It's gonna look like a cemetery with stones to them now. They're just not gonna be able to use them.
do you have a different buffer in mind
Well,
to
I had
enhance
thought
what they
that,
already have?
well, they have a fence, you know, maybe it doesn't have to be, maybe the fence if it was sort of like a, maybe a good compromise would be if it was like a fence that you would see around a horse, horse field, not a picket fence, but just like a fence that you would see like on a horse
Yeah.
farm, something that
Right.
looks natural in a
With
setting.
two-
Just
with a-
something
with a
to kind of separate it.
You're talking about two horizontal slats rather than up
I
and
don't
down.
know,
vertical.
just so it looks, because the intent was to try to keep the cemetery from what it was to kind of look sort of the same, and then put a new cemetery in. And if there was something that would just differentiate it to kind of,
Okay,
maybe, yeah, like, like that, you're saying,
okay,
something
so you're in
more
favor,
natural looking.
you are in favor of keeping the fencing and changing it from a white picket fence to more like a horse field fence with
Right,
two
something like
parallel
that.
slats, right?
Yeah,
Two
maybe with
parallel
some
slats
plantings.
rather than vertical.
And maybe with some scattered plantings along it to try to make, like, maybe a couple of shrubs to sort of make it like a natural barrier, and then it would
Okay.
sort of look natural.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, that would be my only comment.
That's good. Okay. I don't think anybody has any issues with that.
Okay.
Mr. Silver,
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Garrity. Just to speak to Commissioner Corey's point there, I think the natural barrier is the best natural barrier, right? I mean, if a horse paddock is, to my aesthetic, is worse than a picket fence. I don't think we need a fence. I think we need good buffering. But that said, I just very quickly. I don't understand. I honestly don't understand how headstones in cemeteries got to be, why we're arguing that they're unattractive, because, I mean, they're not. I mean, I think Attorney Rizzio mentioned the Mountain Grove Cemetery in Bridgeport, and the last meeting I mentioned Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. These are historic places and they're beautiful. So they're memorial park cemeteries. They're designed to be pastoral. They're designed to be beautiful, restful places. Nobody wants to inter a loved one in an unattractive setting. So to say that cemeteries with monuments are somehow unattractive to a community is, I think that's an idea that does not connect. It's not logical. So I would just respectfully say that to my fellow commissioners, and also to the public. I think it's a flawed idea. Second, this cemetery abuts maybe 2 or 3 houses on Wildfire. Attorney Rizzio talked about that, and probably a few more on to the north on Green Acre and Marathon. Headstones properly buffered are, truly minimal. I mean, to the point that they're not, even if somebody is offended by a headstone, and as I said, I just don't understand why they would be. It's just that there's no impact. There's no material impact on the community. And when we talk about the cemetery being recessed from Daniels Farm Road, it's not recessed from Green Acre, and it's not recessed from Marathon and Wildfire, but nevertheless, it's well buffered. So, so I would say with proper buffering and making sure that happens, people won't even know there's a cemetery next door. And so I just don't see a downside to allowing this. I did do some research on the size and the height of the typical headstone, and I saw bases from 6 inches and 8 inches to 12, and then the stone itself, the monument itself, anywhere from 20 to 24 to and then up to 36. So I think Attorney Rizzio is asking for the maximum, and I just took a tape measure and measured it. 4 feet is up to like mid chest for me, so that's not small. But then I did a Google Maps look at Middlebrook Cemetery, which is all mixed. It's monuments. Some of them are 10 feet tall or 15 feet tall, and honestly, I think that the lack of uniformity in a cemetery is an attribute of, positive attribute, not a negative one. So I'm not sure where I fit on that, but other than that, I do think uniformity maybe isn't necessary. But other than that, if it's well buffered and the diocese agrees to not go into that 55-acre parcel in the back, I think this commission should look favorably on this request. Thank you.
okay. All right. Thank you. So at this time, we are going to go over the correspondence. There were numerous letters sent in opposition from some of the neighbors. Some, a limited few were individual letters, and the others were a form letter that was passed around that had multiple signatures from folks from the public. So what we're going to do now is we are going to note for the record the letters of opposition that were sent into the office. And at this time, Rob Lebrandi is going to read the names of the individuals who submitted the form letter that was passed around and or sent their own in opposition. Just the total number is how many, Rob?
I believe it's 50,
Okay, so please,
53, 53
Okay.
total number.
please go through the 50 names and so they're in for the record.
Okay, David and Laura Denisovich, 3 Allen Drive, Kathy Rubano, 97 Beechwood Ave, Anthony and Kimberly Lombardi, 717 Booth Hill Road, Allison Joseph Mitri, 965 Daniels Farm Road, Jay Karup, 1035 Daniels Farm Road, E. Rothstein, 1040 Daniels Farm Road, Francis Maselli and Andrea Prosco, 1054 Daniels Farm Road, Jan Bing Hyung, 1057 Daniels Farm Road, Antonio and Irene Rodriguez, 1059 Daniels Farm Road, Chris Privilege, 1069 Daniels Farm Road, Ann and John Christopher Eck, 1089 Daniels Farm Road, John and Ann Bunshush, 1150 Daniels Farm Road, Deborah Cresser Owen, 125 Fernwood Road, Jim Galasso, 82 Firehouse Road, Christine William Murphy, 6 Firehouse Road, Kelly Nugent, 12 Firehouse Road, Gail Sheehan, 21 Firehouse Road, Dana Yauman, 35 Firehouse Road, Lauren Pooley, 36 Firehouse Road, Margaret and Gregory DeSanti, 39 Firehouse Road, Lisa Chukta and Dana Muffinson, 64 Firehouse Road, Jeff and Cheryl Coe, 85 Firehouse Road, Leanne Kreutzmann, 92 Firehouse Road, Mary Contino, 10 Green Acres, Herb and Judith Nassett, 17 Green Acres Lane, Arnold Parada, 20 Green Acres Lane, Daniel and Patrick Dunleavy, 73 Briarwood Road, Mary and Jack Barrett, 68 Haverhill Road, Karen and William Stratton, 12 Hillsborough Road, David Allen, 16 Hillsboroughs Road, Milton McCauley, 22 Hillsboroughs Road, Susan Galich, 178 Hurd Road, Ursula Mayer, 45 Marathon Road, Ed Finkstad, 62 Marathon Road, Anthony Kruzik, 63 Marathon Road, Olga Turi, 68 Marathon Road, Carol Winslow, 72 Marathon Road, Janes and Viola Bow, 20 McGuire Road, Joe and Laura Chadwick, 34 North Green Acres Lane, Julia Masari, 7 Norwood Terrace, Caitlin Southern, 103 Oshner Place, Jesus Jimenez, 1930 Old Town Road, Cheryl Pofkin, 123 Pinewood Trail, Cynthia Marina, 127 Pinewood Trail, Elizabeth Urena, 136 Pinewood Trail, Timothy and Laura Coughlin, 20 Seminoles Trail, Joanne and Ken Romare, 73 Undercliff Road, Lucinda Tempinelli, 5 Wildfire Lane, Jessica and John Scavone, 6 Wildfire Lane, Luba and Gregory Cernica, 9 Wildfire Lane, Luciano Scafani, 12 Wildfire Lane, Jacqueline and Daniel Coe, 15 Wildfire Lane. That's it.
Okay, thank you. And the form letter just says that there's they have improved their hampering. I think the applicant did present evidence of how they are being hampered by not being allowed. And the matching the aesthetics of the area, I think several of the commissioners have pointed out the lack of a negative impact from it being recessed and buffered. So at this point, Mr. Chin, do we have people from the public that are here? And if anyone from the public is here to speak on this application, either for or against, now is the time for public input. Mr. Chin will observe if anybody electronically raises their hand. If we have anybody, Mr. Chin will let you in one at a time. And when you're in, you should state your name and address for the record.
There looks to be a number of people who'd like to speak, and we'll go in order. If you'd like to speak, you
Yep.
can raise hand button, and we'll start with Mr. Marcus.
Okay, name and address for the record, please.
Marshall Marcus, 91 Stonehouse Road. I'm speaking for myself, not for the Economic and Community Development Commission. I have sat through Attorney Rizzio's presentations regarding the cemetery, not just now, but also when they came twice for the mausoleum. I feel this is quite disingenuous because it is all about the money. When they came to us for expanding the mausoleum, it was because there was only one other cemetery in the diocese where they could have a mausoleum, and the diocese needed to be able to meet needs and this money to be produced. We allowed them to expand. We allowed them to expand a second time. In the last meeting, he talked about, he not only represents the Bridgeport Diocese Cemeteries, but the Hartford Diocese Cemeteries. I'm familiar with them. I'm not Catholic, but I've run 5 religious cemeteries for 35 years. 50 years ago already, St. Lawrence Cemetery, West Haven, which is the Hartford Diocese, did away with upright stones for new internments unless one small section you bought 4 plots, 2 back to back, so a stone could be shared by 4 internments. I did my first paper in criminology 50 years ago in college, and it was a study of the juvenile delinquency, and it compared things going back to 1930s, and we don't notice it here in small towns. One of the biggest problems is turning over gravestones. There is not a month that I don't have to deal with trying to bill families to get money to re-erect gravestones that have been tipped. It is a problem. Upright gravestones not only cost more to maintain the cemeteries, to mow the lawns and everything else, but they're subject to vandalism and much more defacement, and in some places hate crime. Beyond that, they become a terrible hiding place for drug deals and other illegal activity. And I haven't seen our police department contacted and asked about this. Okay, it's a place to hide. Think back to The Sound of Music. And where did the Von Trapps hide to escape the Nazis to get out of Vienna? They hid in the cemetery behind the gravestones, the upright monuments. It is a problem that could bring more criminal activity into that residential neighborhood. I don't live there, but I do live in town. And I'm not looking to increase these things merely so that more plots could be sold and produce more revenue. There are plenty of cemeteries the diocese owns that allow monuments. And so when you come to us and say, oh, but we can't get mausoleums anywhere else we own, well, you know what? We gave you that. You can send the people who want uprights to other diocesan cemeteries. I just don't buy that. And that's why I'm opposed to this. If it increases the desirability of this cemetery, because it now can have upright stones, it will also increase the traffic of people visiting the cemetery. There will be more automobile traffic and other traffic, foot traffic of people going there, and that affects the neighbors. It also affects traffic on Daniel Farms Road.
Okay,
And
Thank
I'm bringing this up for good reason. I visit cemeteries regularly.
thank you,
And
Mr.
certainly
Marcus.
before the holidays, I go to see my parents, but they have to be addressed. And that's
Okay.
why I'm against this.
Thank you, Mr. Marcus. Mr. Chin, who's next?
Mr. Sclafani.
Okay, name and address for the record, please.
Luciano Villasclafani Jr. I'm a Trumbull taxpayer and have resided at 12 Wildfire Lane, Trumbull, Connecticut for approximately 28 years. I oppose the Gate of Heaven application to remove condition number 4D from the August 8th, 1959 zoning approval, which states no monument shall be permitted and only flat grave markers shall be used. I signed letter number 14 of the original 56 letters of opposition for the first hearing on December 16th, 2020. I understand now there have been submitted an additional 12 more letters of opposition for today's hearing, making a grand total of 68 letters of opposition that have been forwarded to planning and zoning. Gentlemen, when I first moved to Trumbull, Connecticut, approximately 28 years ago, I was living in Stamford, Connecticut. I was recently married and my wife and I were looking to raise a family in a bucolic suburban type of rural setting with plenty of open spaces and a good school system. Trumbull fit the bill. It was a dream come true. When our real estate agent took us to Trumbull, Connecticut to show us homes for purchase, we drove down our current street, Wildfire Lane, and saw for the first time the home we eventually purchased at 12 Wildfire Lane. Upon walking the property that we just purchased, I asked our real estate agent what kind of park was adjacent to and in back of our property. The agent responded, believe it or not, it's a Catholic cemetery. And she also stated that you will never see above ground monuments because there have been restrictions put in place since 1959, which prohibited such. I purchased this house from reliance that there would never be above ground headstones, but only flat ground level burial markers. These restrictions have held for 61 years and have been in operation for 44 years. The cemetery appearance has an appropriate park-like appearance, which is complementary to a rural neighborhood we live in. I ask you now, why change these restrictions now? As far as I'm concerned, the cemetery has not shown any hardship. The cemetery continues to expand. Currently, construction is underway for another mausoleum. During the week and almost every Saturday, we can see cars in procession coming up Daniel Farms Road into the cemetery. You can hear taps playing, hear a 21-gun salute, sometimes bagpipes during the funerals. I recognize that being part of a neighborhood with a cemetery, this comes with the purchase. But it also demonstrates that the cemetery is not suffering any hardship. People have choices when picking a cemetery. When you drive into the Gate of Heaven Cemetery, you know immediately upright headstones are not approved for use because they're none. Everything is a flat marker. For 44 years, everyone knows that this cemetery was approved for flat grave markers only. This has not hurt any volume of burials for the last 4 decades. The cemetery is a busy place. Several of the Trumbull taxpayers who signed the opposition letters, who didn't necessarily live around the cemetery, opposed the change because their parents are buried at Gate of Heaven, and they did not want headstones. Their parents chose this cemetery for its park-like appearance. My appeal to the commissioners, who's protecting the wishes of all those thousands and thousands of people who purchased their plots under a certain appearance for the cemetery? Who is considering the wishes of all those families that buried their loved ones at the Gate of Heaven over the past 44 years because they wanted this park-like setting for their family and an eternal resting place? Please remember the thousands of people who purchased plots and chose to be buried at the Gate of Heaven over the past 44 years with its current restrictions because they wanted this park-like setting. A few people wanting headstones should not trump the thousands who were buried over the past 44 years. Also, please remember hundreds of Trumbull taxpayers who built or purchased homes in the area, knowing that the restrictions would keep the cemetery in a park-like appearance, would not make this neighborhood evolve into a city or urban feel. The cemetery, to me, has not shown any hardship. Just saying some people want a headstone isn't hardship. The cemetery is busy as ever, and they expanded. In the December 16th hearing, Attorney Russo complained that the cemetery was losing business to other cemeteries because of these restrictions. However, there were no letters in favor of changing these restrictions from Trumbull taxpayers who so complained because of these restrictions. Mr. Russo also stated there was only one neighbor on Wildfire Lane who was affected by the view. There's 3 neighbors who were directly impacted. My house, from the front yard, you can see the cemetery. From the office I'm in now, my wife's art studio, I can see the cemetery. I can see it from my patio. I can see it from my porch. I can see it from all the windows of my house. You want to put up screening? That's a joke. You put up evergreens that the deer will eat the first 5 feet of them. This impacts us all in the street. As far as I'm concerned, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But it does impact us here in the street. I urge all the commissioners to reject this application. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Scalfani. I'm going to have to put some restrictions as we're going forward here with the rest of the public comments. If you've already signed a letter and already had your objection registered, you have to state that at the beginning, please. And we'd ask you to keep your comments to any subject matters that haven't been discussed yet. You can say I'm against it for the reasons stated. I don't want to have to limit people's speech, but we can't have people repeating the exact same thing all night, and we do want to hear from everybody possible. So thank you, Mr. Chin. Who's next?
I believe Ms. Coe is next.
Can you mute people as they're done, Mr. Chin, and remove them from the panel?
Yes, sir.
Okay, name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Coe. I live at 15 Wildfire Lane.
Okay.
So my property is the one that has the direct view of the cemetery. I can see it from my inside and through my entire backyard, where I spend a lot of my time. I see the funeral processions coming through. I see people visiting their loved ones, walking through with their dogs, bike riding and jogging through the cemetery. And there's a large family of deer, I think at one point up to 11 of them, that my kids would watch like clockwork coming from the wooded area over on the side of our stone wall on the cemetery side, and watch them come and go through the small wooded area every morning and every night. So that's part of the beauty to me of Gates of Heaven, is that prairie-like view of being able to experience that, being able to experience the natures there, being able to experience the area and the surroundings. And I understand Gates of Heaven is saying that in response to that, well, we're going to put up these buffers and we're going to put up these plants and the evergreens, but that's not what the residents want. That's not what I want. I don't want to suddenly have that view blocked. And it's not a solution to the opposition to me. So when the diocese, and I'm sorry, I am here in requesting a reject for this application.
Okay, thank you.
When the diocese presented back in the 50s, there was opposition then. Back in the 70s, I know there was Trumbull Time articles talking about standing room only hearings and heated debates. And unfortunately, during a pandemic, we're not able to do that. We're not able to all come together and be able to stand. So what we did is we have signatures. We have signatures, people of the residents that are opposing this, that don't want this in their area. And for the 44 years that Gates of Heaven has been in operation, the Daniels Farm area has continued to grow, it has continued to develop, and it has continued to maintain that hometown and rural feeling. The surrounding homes and the cemetery complement each other for that reason. And at this point, at 44 years, there doesn't need to be a change. I was raised in Trumbull. 3 years ago, I bought this house when it was time to raise my family, because we were told there was a restriction in place and that there would not be upright markers. My home having the direct view of Gates of Heaven, I am directly impacted by this change. The area being presented is within 100 feet of my property line, is where they are able to have burial plots. 100 feet is not far when you're talking about burial sites. And then you're adding in these buffers in between that is now going to completely change my property, the view of my property. This will end up being right in my backyard, where I spend time with my family, time with my friends when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. And you're having this right at the front of the cemetery. So it's going to be the first thing you see when you drive in. It completely changes the aesthetics of the cemetery. It changes the prairie-like feeling. It changes what this cemetery was supposed to be. And it affects those that have already been buried there. The loved ones that are there, the people that have, like I said, they've already purchased the plots. You know, there are other Catholic cemeteries under the Bridgeport Diocese that have raised monuments that where it's permitted. And this has not stopped people from going to Gates of Heaven. He mentioned 300 burials a year. You're shy of one a day at that point. That doesn't show a hardship to me. The approval to the expansion of the mausoleum. The having to request to go into from 450 feet, which was the original buffer between where plots were allowed to be buried and my property line used to be 450. They reduced that to 100 to allow for additional plots. That doesn't show a hardship to me. Now offering families the ability to engrave pictures on the mausoleum things at $400 to $500 each does not show a hardship to me. It's additional money in their pocket.
I'm going to have to ask you to tie it up. And one of the things, just for the rest of the folks too, a hardship is not required for this application. I think people are lost on that terminology. Everyone is focusing on it. I'm just trying to save people some time. They have the ability to make an application for a change for their business needs, which they have presented. The word hardship, that's for Zoning Board of Appeals. So everyone's focusing on something that's not required.
I think it's because it's mentioned in the application itself. So that's presented in that way.
Right.
I'll finish up by just saying that someone on the last meeting had said that the opinion of current residents versus a marker for eternity. Well, whether an upright or a flat marker, it's still a marker for eternity. It doesn't change your place for all eternity with God. It doesn't make one person's death mean more than another to have upright markers. And one of the beauties about Gates of Heaven is that everybody is the same. And you're all the same in God's eyes. And not to sound heartless, but the families that are visiting these burial sites, they're going to move away. They're going to pass away. They're going to stop visiting. But the families that are in these homes are going to continue to be here. They're going to continue to be in this area. And you have received opposition from these families asking you to please support your neighbors, support the people that are in this town, support these taxpayers that oppose this, and reject the application for the upright markers.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chin, who's next?
Yes, Ms. Prushko is next.
Name and address for the record, please. You're on mute. You have to take yourself off mute.
Andrea Maselli Prushko. I co-own the house at 1054 Daniels Farm Road, right at the beginning of the road going down. I strongly oppose the Gate of Heaven application to remove condition 4D from the August 8th, 1959 zoning approval. We recommend there be no change to the existing restrictions. My family and I have a special history with the property. My grandparents, Emmanuel and Jenny Maselli, owned the beautiful parcel of land prior to selling it to the Diocese of Bridgeport. As a child, I remember the barn with the animals that my grandfather had and running through the cornfields. A lot was sectioned off for my parents to build their home. And that's where I grew up at 1054 Daniels Farm Road. Many of my beloved family and friends far and near have chosen to bury their loved ones at the Gate of Heaven Cemetery. My dad and in-laws are there also. Why do people choose the Gate of Heaven Cemetery? They love to go there. It's beautiful. It's a very serene, safe, park-like setting, which fits the surrounding neighborhood. I've never heard of anyone complain about not having upright headstones or monuments because there are such a variety of burial options there. You have the mausoleum, the circular area for cremations, and the in-ground plots. We don't feel that there is any hardship with the Gate of Heaven Cemetery. There are funeral processions that go by daily, often keeping us from leaving our driveway for a few minutes. And the cemetery continues to grow with the future expansion of the mausoleum, and funerals just keep going. They don't stop. In addition, we feel having a cemetery that is more visible from our house with upright headstones will result in lower property value. The headstones will be very visible from our home and some of the neighbors' homes. We will look out our windows or sit on our back deck, and we have a straight view of the 2 acres of headstones. This changes the park-like view to an ordinary cemetery that one might see in a large city environment, like Bridgeport. If that's what people want, then there's plenty of other ones available. In conclusion, we want the restriction 4D to remain in place and strongly recommend that this application by the diocese be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chin, who is next? And I've asked if you've already signed and presented a letter of opposition to please state such. Mr. Chin, who's next?
There's a caller on the phone, a 917 number ending in 143.
Okay, if your last 3 digits are 143, please state your name and address for the record. If your phone number starts with 917 and ends in 143, we're calling on you if you have a comment at this time.
This is Greg Cernica at 9 Wildfire Lane. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hello?
go ahead.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry,
Please
I'm
try
not-
and keep it brief if you.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. You don't want to repeat stuff. I am not on Zoom. I'm just on a phone, so I didn't see a lot of stuff that went on. I do understand that the cemetery just submitted a plan yesterday. There's a lot of neighbors that haven't seen it. There was a lot of discussion. First thing I want to talk about, one of the reasons you have 73 different signatures, the neighborhood kind of, I think, hit the limit with this headstone thing. I think there's a lot of people who've lived here a long time who believe that the Catholic diocese has established a pattern over the last 40, 50 years where they just keep chipping away at, I'll call it variance creep. You'll disagree with me. But whether it's building a convent for the St. Joseph Sisters, then it was a cemetery approval, then it was the sisters left. If you go back through the history of all this, then they built the mausoleum, and then they moved. It was a bishop's residence, and then a few years ago, they tried to expand in 1996. I guess that was stopped. But in February 2015, they approved the expansion of the bishop's residence, which isn't even shown on this print. How does that affect where the screening is going to be? But when I talked to some of these people, I collected a lot of the opposition letters because with COVID, we couldn't attend a hearing, and a lot of people, you start getting phone calls from neighbors who talk to their other neighbors. So we set this form letter up. But you have a lot of people on Firehouse Road, 27, 33, 39, 45, 51, who see the cemetery 6 months a year because the leaves go down. Contrary to Attorney Rizzio, it's not just 15 wildfire that sees the cemetery. It's 12. I can see it. The leaves go down. The only screening that I see is my neighbors. There is zero screening at the cemetery. The screening that was recommended by the cemetery on this plot plan is woefully deficient. They do nothing to block the eastern end of this 1.87 area. People on Daniels Farm Road, 1059, 1057, 1035, and then you just heard from Andrea Prushko at 1054, 1040 have a dead view right into this area. And then you got the people on Marathon Road and Green Acres Lane can see right through. 6 months a year, see the cemetery. This is a major issue. People have tolerated flat stones. I would project, Attorney Rizzio said he has 25,000 people buried there. If you go back to the article in 1974 in the Trumbull Times, they estimated the capacity to be 26,000. Look at the print that was submitted by the cemetery. They define this as a cemetery expansion. I would project that you can probably get rid of the headstones, and they would still fill up the 177 and the 187 acres, those 3.64 acres with flat stones with no problems. You don't need a fence. I agree with that. The screening is woeful, but most people will tolerate it, the neighborhoods, because we moved in here with the flat markers. I am, again, urging the commissioners here. You have 73 taxpayers in Trumbull who are against this. I think there's been a continued creep in this area and pushing. And I think a lot of people just said enough. They're comfortable with the setup of the cemetery. People have lived for 44 years. If you need a headstone, they've gone somewhere else. And people have chosen this cemetery they've had no problems with flat markers. So again, and then I think you asked, I did sign one of the opposition letters for 9 Wildfire Lane. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chin, who's next?
I believe that's everybody who wishes to speak. If there's anybody else, please press the raise hand button or press *9 on your phone.
Okay, you can remove that person. Attorney Rizzio, would you like to make any comments at this time?
Yes, I would. I can go through them one by one, but generally, first of all, this is not a chip away. I think the diocese has handled this property with more care than any probably other landholder in the city, in the town for the last 50 years. They have about a total of maybe 80 acres there, and they have done the best they can. They've kept things pastoral. They've kept things always well maintained. It's a cemetery. Okay, we are honoring. The current proposal still honors the 450-foot setback. That's a 150-yard setback from Daniels Farm Road, with also a difference in grade of about 20 to 30 feet. No, as you both all know, no one from Daniels Farm Road will see these headstones. The first number of homes along Wildfire Road will not see where these headstones are, because that will remain exactly the way it is, that they can look across. So people either want to see the cemetery, or they don't want to see the cemetery. It's all confusing to me. However, they will not see the headstones with the landscaping that we were proposing. I've never heard cemeteries being linked to crime and being great getaway houses. We have never had any issues in our cemeteries. We operate 15 cemeteries throughout Fairfield County. We have no problem with that. We have no problem with tipping of gravestones. The tipping of the gravestones are probably the old gravestones where they're just set into the ground. The Incredible Hulk couldn't tip this gravestone. You need a machine literally to place the headstone on top of the base, which is in cement. So there'll be no tipping of headstones going on. There will not be the influx of drug dealers hanging out at a cemetery doing their drug deals behind 4-foot headstones. I just don't see it. If it would have happened, it would have gone there. They could have gone in the back anytime and committed all the crimes you want in the rear of the cemetery at any time. This is just, the neighbors don't understand the application. The neighbors are just against everything. They've been against everything that has gone on with the cemetery. The cemetery has done a great job. The diocese has done a great job of literally having the least amount of impact that 80 acres could have in this town along Daniels Farm Road. They are now asking to basically allow what every other cemetery in town is permitted to do. We are still maintaining the 100-foot buffer of every property against wildfire, and there's only really one that's in the affected area where the headstones will go. Chris, if you can pull up the plan, the overhead plan, the first number of houses along Wildfire and the ones across the street will never be affected. In effect, that will remain unplanted. So as you can see, there is one house, which I believe is Mrs. Coe, which is in that corner. And we agree, we can put low level plantings there, so we will not impair her view, and keep the plantings to no more than 4 feet high if she would like, or if the commission would desire. This is not a popularity contest, it's a zoning commission, and the zoning commission is looking at what makes sense for a cemetery use.
Yeah. Mr. Rizzio, I just want to interrupt for 10 seconds and then continue. I understood her point, but there was one conflict of continuity there where she said families would move on who had relatives there, but the neighbors are there forever. The neighbors are also going to move on. You know, the
I think
continuity was
residents-
not there because the specific residents' desire now, we have to incorporate everybody's feelings, everybody's desires for today and the impact. And the commissioners have all discussed how there's no impact for sight or visual to the neighbors. But in this particular case, let's not harp on the
No.
overall plans buffering for here. Just continue on with what you're
Yeah,
doing.
no, believe me, the cemetery will be here, and was here before a lot of the neighbors and will be here certainly a lot longer than the neighbors. And the diocese has done a tremendous job of maintaining it. You never hear any complaints that there's been any mismanagement of the property. The property has not been upkeep. The upkeep there, the diocese spends a tremendous amount of money on upkeep. But there is a true demand for headstones. We have 1 or 2 people a week that leave the town of Trumbull or leave this cemetery who want to be buried in Trumbull, Catholic families that have not had the ability to do so. We believe that there is and then there's a great deal who just settle for the flats because they want to be buried in Trumbull. With regard to the fencing, we're okay with the split rail. We're okay with no fencing, and we're okay with the white picket fence. I will take the blame, not Mr. Majorca, no one else is. My white picket fence was my idea of segregating the headstones from the flats with a physical barrier that was something you could see through.
I think let's just leave that where it is. I think in deliberations between Mr. Corey's desires and the input from the fencing from the other commissioners, I think there'll be some hybrid of low-level plantings and maybe 2 or 3 feet of fence here and there, 5 feet of fence, one piece, just for aesthetics. But I want to let the commissioners work that out, so I wouldn't dwell on that.
True. Okay. So for that reason, I don't believe there is any negative impact. We don't need to prove a hardship, as the chairman pointed out. We are maintaining a 100-foot buffer, which is probably one of the largest buffers of any use in town, certainly the largest residential buffer of any use in town. And then especially when you consider that it's not buffering from a structure. So the maximum height that we're agreeing to, and we would agree to, is a 4-foot limitation. And we would agree to any buffering that the commission desired, and that we would work out with staff or the town tree ward. Finally, I just think we've had a very productive discussion. We've tried to meet all of the needs of the commission, all the concerns of the commission. I don't think you'll make the neighbors happy, no matter what we propose there, whether it was the mausoleum, which people came out and spoke against, which no one can even see, and no one even knows. Most people drive by and never even know there's a mausoleum back there, which has had no impact on the neighbors. We believe the same will go with the headstones. We believe it's the appropriate use for the site. We believe there's a demand for the use, and we don't believe we believe we have done all we can to minimize, to ensure that there's no negative impact on the neighbors' value of their homes or the visual impact on their homes or any of the residents of Trumbull who'd be hiding behind Daniels Farm Road. And I clearly, I think we can establish that there is no impact on the health, safety, and welfare of any residents of Trumbull. I don't see this becoming a den of criminal activity.
Okay.
For all those reasons, I would respectfully request this commission grant this application. I thank you for your time. We've tried to take into consideration all of your concerns, and I hope we have done so. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you stop sharing your screen so I can see all the participants, please, Mr. Russo? Thank you. All right. So at this time, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go around and ask each commissioner if they are prepared to proceed this evening. Okay. Mr. Silber, are you prepared to proceed this evening?
Yes.
Mr. Prush, are you prepared to proceed this evening? You're muted. You're muted, sir.
I'm a little uncomfortable proceeding this evening only because we just got this plan tonight or today. And I'd like to go back up there, and especially after hearing from the neighbors, and take these things all into consideration, but not having known before this where the proposal is. And since so much of this has to do with the land, I think it would be wise for myself to go look at it again.
Okay, Mr. Curry, are you ready to proceed this evening?
I don't feel comfortable at this time proceeding. Like,
Okay.
there's so much discussion and I'm unsettled with it.
Okay, Mr. DeQuilla, you have the same position as at the beginning of the meeting?
Yes, I do. I need to have
Okay,
adequate amount of time to review this new data.
all right, so I think that at this time, I'll take a motion to continue the hearing until next week. I don't want to close the hearing in case the commissioners have a question that can be answered on the record. So,
I could just, I'm sorry, Fred, if I could just say one thing. It also gives the public a chance to see the plan, which they haven't even seen. In all fairness to the applicant, the public, and they should, if they look at the plan as well, because they may come back, the public, as you just said, may want to have something to say, so.
okay, so at this time, I'll take a motion to continue the hearing until our next regular meeting. Mr. Curry, seconded. Mr. DeQuilla, all in favor, aye. Aye, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, just for public reference, the plan is posted on the town website. So they can take a look at, or if they have any questions, they can email me and I can send it to them
Yeah,
as well.
we're not, it is highly unlikely we are going to be hearing public comment again, especially from people that have already submitted a letter and or gave testimony this evening.
Okay.
So, all right, at this time, we will continue on. The next item is the acceptance of the minutes from the December 16 Planning and Zoning meeting. Is there a motion? Somebody? We need a motion to accept the minutes. Mr. Curry, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Prush, are there any comments or changes to the, excuse me, the minutes from the 16th of December? No, hearing none. All those in favor accept the minutes, aye. Aye, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, unanimous. Okay, hearing no other business before
Mr.
us.
Chairman,
Go.
can we do have to make a modification to the calendar date for September?
Okay. The September meeting falls on a religious holiday. We're motioning to move it out 1 week to what's the new date?
The 22nd?
22nd. So is there a motion to move that date? Mr. Curry seconded. Mr. DeQuilla, yes, seeing as you pointed it out. Okay, any further discussion to moving out the date for the September meeting by 1 week? Hearing none. All those in favor, aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, unanimous. Any other business before the board?
No, thank you.
Okay, hearing none, excuse me. Motion to close. Mr. Curry, seconded. Mr. Silver, all in favor, aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, motion. We're closed. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies and the public. Have a great night.